Say hello, hello, hello. I'm down in Florida today. Our guest, Dave Lozinger, is up in Pennsylvania today. If you are listening live and you can hear me, let us know, please, and let us know where you are dialing in from. It's always fun to see, what cities and states and countries are out there listening today. Thank you so much for your patience. We were having some technical challenges as we were getting on today, because we're new to this LinkedIn Live thing. So we are always looking for feedback on all presentations we do. And we're hoping for your feedback as well on this presentation. This is our second one. If you were with us last time, you saw International Man of Mystery, Hans, and I talk about emotional intelligence in Projectland. So check that out if you like. And don't forget, if you're a PMP, you get PDUs for all of this. You can claim PDUs for sure. With that, I'm the founder and CEO of PMOtraining and our divisions, the Project Gurus and the Project Guru Academy. So I would like to welcome our amazing guest here, Dave Lozinger. Welcome, Dave. And we're going to talk about how much change management is enough.
Hey, Dawn, how are you?
Great.
Always in Florida. I've got half an inch of ice outside waiting for us all to slip on.
So you guys have to be safe out there with that ice. So Dave, tell us about yourself a little bit. Let's pull up this awesome picture slide. So let me introduce Dave a little. So Dave is a project guru for sure. He's a change guru. And also he is super interesting because he was a Navy fighter pilot, and then he was also a flight instructor. In addition to that, he's got his pride and joys all around him there. In the other picture, he's been married for how many years now, Dave?
20 plus.
20 plus, that's right. So
yeah, I just say plus now.
Yeah, to an amazing woman, and they have 5 children. So if you thought your life was busy, all right, Dave and his wife are super busy. And Dave, tell us about that truck in the upper left. What is that thing?
Yeah, so that truck, she's my pride and joy amongst my other kids as well, right? But that's a 1993 Land Rover Defender from South Africa. So it's got a couple cool things, including the aux fuel tank for when you're going through the desert. And most importantly, it's got the right-hand drive. But that's the first vehicle. I've always been mechanically minded, but I've never been smart enough to actually work on a modern vehicle. So that's the first vehicle that is down to my level. And I've literally taken her apart. Pretty much everything, every nut and bolt, everything's been off her and has been replaced. But that's my girl. That's Molly D. And then I've also got 5 other girls, actually, and 6 if you count my mom living with me in the house.
Wow.
So I got lots of girls. It's me and Johnny. We're on our own.
You are surrounded. I feel for you. And thanks. So in the bottom right there, what is that?
That is the best fighter jet ever devised by man. That is the F-14 Tomcat. So I got the good fortune to fly that back in the day. I got over 200 carrier landings, and it was made famous in Top Gun, and that's me in the bottom left when I was a little skinnier and good looking. If I had to get into the jet today, you'd have to build it around me or use a cherry picker to, pick me up and drop me in. So that's me.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Dave, and thank you so much for joining us today to share your experience.
My pleasure.
One of the things that I love about Dave, you guys, is that when it comes to, project and change management, he's really practical, right? So like he might know all the theory and everything, right? And, but he's really practical. And that's a lot of what we emphasize at PMOtraining is the practical side. And so today what we're going to talk about is what, first of all, change management is. So we're going to talk about that, of course, just as a foundation to level set everyone. And then we'll also talk about how much change management we need and what some critical components are and some advice from Dave on this. And because Dave was in the military, and he's hands-on type of guy, right? With a Defender and everything. I just wanted to point that out because he's got a different perspective, I think, than you'll hear from a lot of change management folks who are very much in that hearts and minds mentality. So in addition to the hearts and minds that you want to, influence, What else, Dave, would you suggest, that we think about?
Yeah, I think, I think the final test is performance. And, we always talk about outcomes, right? But at the end of the day, we're really talking about human performance, right? So whether you're putting a new tool in, a new process, new system, the question is, how well do the human people use it, right? Do they find themselves either being confused by it? Do they find themselves, not using it all or going back to old ways? And the other thing we talk about today too is, so performance is one thing from a, hands perspective and such, but also decision making too, right? As we get into more and more data-driven systems, right? Are our people actually pulling out the data, getting information, gaining insight, and then using the information to make good decisions, which ultimately land in actions, right? So the hearts and minds stuff, right? The why we're doing something, what it's about, that stuff's pretty easy. But at the end of the day, we all know that anybody that's done a business case knows that if the actual outcomes are not realized, that is people doing what we're asking of them, the business case, falls apart pretty quickly. So human performance is the outcome.
Yeah, the outcomes we talk about a lot. So, and tell us just a little bit, Dave, about, so in the military, and some people are always very fascinated, right, by the military. Mm-hmm. In the military, where did you first get into this change management and human performance?
Yeah. So the first place, ironically enough, was when I was at college, right? So at the Naval Academy, I don't know if anybody knows this, they've got all manner of majors, right? Everything from physics, science to English and history, right? But everybody graduates with a Bachelor of Science. So even the English majors, the history majors, poli-sci majors graduate with a Bachelor of Science, because you will take electrical engineering, you'll take chemistry, you'll take physics, even as an English major, because you're expected to have some kind of technical proficiency, right? So being that I was actually a real science major, I was a physics major, right? I can't tell you how many, open eyes, my fellow English majors and history majors came to, and they said, what is this physics thing? What is this chemistry thing? What is electrical engineering? So I got to sit down with them. And of course, they took the more basic version, right, of all these classes. Right. But so that's where it started. And then, so I just got pretty good at, kind of working side by side with somebody and helping them figure out like the other trick of the academy, right? That's a no kidder when they say the Naval Academy is 2.0 and go, right? You learn very quickly just to do just enough to meet the because there's so much coming at you, you do just enough to learn to meet the standard and go, right? So that's the thing I focused on most with the folks that had to learn the basic science. I was like, hey, look, this is all you really need to know. I mean, there's all this other stuff, but don't let this stuff cloud your vision or get you confused, right? At the end of the day, we got to get you past this test so you can pass physics, so you can take your naval history courses, right? So that was what it was really about. Once again, it's human performance. How much is enough, right, without going over? And also, how do we make sure we actually reach it, right? Because we've got to hit it, right? We're not going to take it.
That's a great parallel, especially because in corporations, we don't necessarily have exams. We don't give people exams. They have to do their jobs. So let's move on to the next slide there, where let's talk about let's just level set everybody about what is organizational change management anyway.
Yeah, so when you use, certainly, so when you use the term change management, there's all kinds of changes going on in organizations, especially if you're a PMP, right? The change management piece is actually about, changes to projects and scope. We're talking about organizational or behavioral, right? So we're talking about the process of preparing people for a change, right? Change of their work or making decisions differently, whatever it is, and what that whole process looks like. And one of the things I think the biggest takeaway from that today is that, yes, it is a process. And we're going to talk about how to make sure you've got a nice, smooth process from start to end, that it doesn't start out with a bang, like usually happens, and then a whole lot of nothing. And then like 9 months later, there's another bang that you hope takes when you realize, oh, we better start this up again. So we're going to talk about the process. Yeah.
And we don't like hope, right? Hope is not a plan.
Hope is not a plan. True. True. All right.
So let's get to our poll question then and hear from folks that are on with us. We want to know from you, And if you're, looking at the video, think about this, right? Does your team or organization currently have people dedicated to organizational change management? So just answer A, if yes, you have dedicated change management staff in your company or your organization today. B, yes, you have dedicated change management staff on your project. So maybe not in the whole organization, that's A, but on your project, at least you have a dedicated change management staff. C, you have both. A and B in the organization and on your project. And D, we got nobody, we got no one, we got nothing, which often means in D that the project manager is expected to know all this and do all of this. So A, B, C, D, just, throw in your answers in chat. We'd love to hear from you and see, what your experience is. So,
and Dawn, I can't see any of the responses. So if you could convey them, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So what I'd like to know, Dave, is when you have had the situation where, especially where we've got nobody, we've got no one, and, you're expected to do it. Is that how you started with change management?
No, actually, so I started, so formal change management in a corporate environment, right? That was 15 or 16 years ago, right? And at that time, change management was, the first person to actually identify change management as a process, as a discipline, was a guy named Cotter, and that was probably 25, 30 years ago. But 15 years ago, that still hadn't caught on yet. So 15 years ago, when I was at one of the big consulting companies, right, the projects that our team did had change management built in, right? But it was often the case that, we were doing projects and then the client would also be doing some other stuff and they didn't have it. So we would often provide other folks to give the change management expertise to get them on board. But where there is an absence of change management, this happens all the time today, right? Usually what they'll say is, oh, we can do it. And they'll have someone who's, either pretty good at writing or communications, whatever, like you'd be our change management person. And this is exactly what happens. What usually happens is you get the big bang in the beginning, right? Because it's a no-brainer. We won't announce this thing, even though it's not coming till like 9 months from now, right? And then when it's about to go live, there's the other big bang at the other end and the part that's missing in the middle, right? So that's the message today is, if the importance of having a change management person on your team is that you're going to get that nice middle ground, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, but you're going to have a nice steady stream, a nice drip, and you're going to really have a process of change management as opposed to like two events.
Yeah. So I'm seeing a D, that we've got nobody, we've got no one, and the PMs have to figure it out. So let's help especially those folks, but also if you do have folks that are change management staff, then this will help you to hopefully understand a little bit better what they should be doing, maybe what they are doing, and make some suggestions and plans to ensure success for your projects from the people aspects of things. I'd love to know, how much change management do we need to successful? Where is this just enough that you talked about in the Naval Academy?
I'm glad you asked. All right. So this is the change curve. It's also called the adoption curve. It's a little dated, but I think it has so much utility that I usually don't see, which is why I bring it up. Okay. And what I want to demonstrate here is the process of bringing people on board, right? And you can imagine anything big, right? Whether it's, telling your parents you're about to get married, whether it's, you're taking a new journey in life, or whether it's something at work, right? Usually, we always become accustomed to it in stages, right? There's the shock factor. There's the, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I'm going to fake it till I make it. And then there's the, okay, let's make it happen. And then finally, like, oh, you're looking back and, all right, that wasn't that bad. And I can see how that life change or work change is really helping us out, right? So there is a process for that. Mm-hmm. And, this curve here shows the process that most folks go through, all right? The first one is awareness, right? And this is really, does someone know that a change is coming and that they're affected? And it's as simple as that, right? Just those two things. After they learn that, the next question is, oh, okay, so I'm going to be affected, all right? How am I going to be affected, right? Is this, am I going to have to do more work? Am I going to get terminated, right? That's the other one too, right? When you hear that other people are being affected, but you're not, That kind of scares people sometimes, but regardless, what's going to happen to me? Do I have to do more work? Do I have to work from home now, or go in the office, whatever it happens to be? Right. And that's usually where you get the most resistance on things, right? We're going to talk about that. The next part is, okay, now that I know what I'm supposed to do, right? How do I actually do this thing, right? Maybe it's a new process, maybe it's a new system, maybe it's a new way of doing things. This is the actual hands-on part about how do I do my job, right? So if the first two, if awareness and understanding was around, just knowledge, right? And mental understanding of what this is, commitment is the first place where we start talking about actually having to do something, right? And we start talking, this is where we start talking about proficiency, right? Proficiency starts rearing its head, human performance, right? Because once again, you can't measure thought, right? You can measure doing. Right. And then the last part is adoption, right? We hear about adoption or sustainment, which is this change sticking? And is this change bringing benefit? Does this change stand on its own and that we can do it well? Right. But is this change and the capability it brings also something that we can incorporate or should incorporate elsewhere in our business? Right. This is kind of like the bleed over effect. Right. So those are the four things. And the main point I want to get across is the first two: awareness, understanding about mental, and commitment and adoption are the actual doing, right? So with that background, let me see what I've got here. Hang on, what's next on my slide? Oh yeah, there we go, right? And I've got some high level stuff on, the description. There's a lot more to it. And one of the keys to being a good change manager is that we've got ways of knowing and measuring how a team's doing or how an organization's doing relative to these. I think we'll skip that for today. That's a different story. But the question, go ahead.
Well, so and the thing that we're finding is that there are a lot of organizations with limited resources today. That's been decades of cutting and downsizing and all kinds of efforts to do more with less. So what's the bottom line on what to consider and plan for when we have limited resources?
Well, before we get there, right, I want to ask our participants, right, how far do you, based on what I described there, right, awareness, understanding, commitment, and adoption, how far do you think you need to go to be successful? And by successful, I mean that you have a pretty decent chance of telling the sponsor or the CEO, whatever, that, hey, all those business outcomes, we're going to realize those. Those will be realized with a high degree of certainty. So if you think it's awareness, understanding, or if you think it's awareness, give us a 1, understanding 2, commitment 3, and adoption 4. So if you could just populate a chat with those. And Dawn, if you could just kind of get a feel for what people are saying.
Yeah, I will. And while they're answering awareness 1, understanding 2, commitment 3, or adoption 4, how far do you think we have to go to be successful? Tell us a little bit about what, we are, where you are challenged, even with the organizations that we work with that do have formal change management practices, the hearts and minds heavy folks, where are you most challenged?
Challenge? I'll give you one, right? And this is one of the attributes of a good change manager, right? This is why you need change management people. It's not unusual when you have a technical team, right? They're developing whatever it is that's new, right? They're developing a new system, the new process, whatever it is. And you know how it is, right? It's always really easy to get to like 80%. It takes a little more to get to 90%, but there's always there might be a couple of exceptions and they're just really tough, right? And maybe it's just it's a hard nut to crack, or you know what, the way we got to crack it is the way that nobody wants to do it. Right. Well, whatever it happens to be. But the point is the solution is not fully baked. And it's not unusual for that team to say, we're ready to go. And as the change manager that, yeah, you know what, we're ready to go for 97% of the stuff that's going to happen. But it's your job to call the team out and say, hey, look, this will go along. So this will be swimmingly for 97% of the time, but there's 1 or 2 things here that are real sticklers, and I know it. And you can either take my word for it because I've talked to people and they've said it, right? Or we can roll this thing out, right? And deal with it then. So I think that's one of the big pieces that your change person does, and your project manager too, to tell you the truth. The PM ought to be doing this stuff as well. But making sure that when they roll this thing out, that it is baked to the point where it ought to be and complete. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. I mean, that is definitely a challenge. And also for me and what I've seen, not to pick on the hearts and minds people, but I like hands and I like practical, and I love it that you take apart your Land Rover Defender all by yourself.
Ultimately, it's hands that do, right? Hands do.
Absolutely. Right? And so we have some input here, and and some folks are saying for adoption. So let's move on to the next slide and see, what you have to say, Dave, to coach us on how to make sure that we're enabling success for our projects.
All right.
You have to get the whole way to adoption, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so let's talk about this. So back to the Naval Academy, right? 2.0 and go. And if 2.0 wasn't good enough to graduate, it wouldn't be 2.0, right? That's our little sayings we had back then, right? And I had a little more than a 2.0, but not much. So my answer, and this is after doing this for 15 years, right, is I think we've got to get to commitment, okay? And if you remember, the definition of commitment is that people know how to do their new job, right? If you remember, adoption is actually, I know how to take this capability and take it further, right? To expand it, have it be the best it can be, right? And the other reason I say commitment is as far as we need to get to now is a question of, once again, human cognitive development, right? We gain proficiency over time. We gain understanding over time, right? And for most of the folks, and I'm talking about the end users now, something that's going to be rolled out to them for the first time. Think of anything you do that takes a certain level of dedication, effort, and conscious involvement to become good at.
That would be like everything, right? Like everything.
Darn near everything that's worth doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, tying shoes, driving a car, especially a stick shift.
Exactly.
Like anything, right, that we've ever done. Yep. It's practice.
It's practice, and it's only over time that you really understand how things fit together, like unconsciously, right? And that's where we are with adoption.
Okay.
Right. So the reason I say 3 is because I'm talking about the right here and now, right? So when we get to go live, we've got to get to commitment, right? And we darn well better get there, because if we don't tell people how to do, right? If they don't know how to do what it is we're asking of them, we're not going to see the realization of that. Conversely, it's going to take time for people to actually learn what this means to them, right? It's going to sink in. And it's like, once we start doing things and we start doing things, you have those realizations as you're driving in the car. You're like, oh my gosh, this is how this thing fits in with this, or this is how this can improve that, or there's a trade-off, whatever it happens to be, right? That's what adoption is, right? Adoption is taking this capability to the next level, but that usually happens over time. So what I'm going to tell you is commitment is the minimum that's required for successful implementation of this project right now. But if you also nurture good adoption, which takes time, right? That's when you start talking about things such as, hey, we're going to have an industry-leading capability, right? Because what we're doing is we're taking this capability that is adequate for our needs right now, and we're actually growing it, cultivating it, getting more out of it, fine-tuning it. So my answer is, how far do you have to go? Commitment. And that's as far as you got to go. But if you don't get there, you're going to have as much of a failure as you had if you didn't put any effort into it.
Yeah. And I love that, especially because I talk a lot, as you know, about what is it going to take to declare victory on our project, right? And so if in the beginning, we set up the expectations that to the sponsor and to all the stakeholders that we are going to declare victory when we get to the commitment piece, and we've got, job aids in place, let's say, and they're written, and we've run people through the training. We've demonstrated that they can do their jobs. We've done hypercare for 2 or 3 weeks after, let's say, it's a new system that's gone live. And we also have a plan for how, after the project is over, someone will be making sure that we continue up this curve through adoption, so that the benefits that we were promising from the beginning are realized. And so,
absolutely. Yep.
Right. So I want to make sure that everybody is thinking in the beginning of the project about what, our friend and colleague Frank likes to say is like, success is crashing on the moon. Success is not bringing everybody the whole way back home, right? So, what is that the case? Or do we have to continue this project and bring everybody back home? And in the case of most implementations, you can be like, listen, we're going to crash on the moon. We're going to get everybody working on it. They're going to be in the system. We're going to make sure that they have the support they need to succeed, in the first couple of weeks. And then we are done with the project. We're declaring victory on the project. And it's the operations job and the sponsor's job, or whoever's job, somebody's named, to continue on with the adoption.
Yeah. So with that, right? So this is the first desired outcome, right? How far do we have to go? I want to talk into the next part about how do we get there, right? So let me jump ahead to that. And the next question is, okay, so we know how far to go. What's the most important change component to enable success? Okay, I've got a little bit of a preamble here, right? So the question is, given that we've got these different levels of cognitive understanding or ability, right? What are the tools that we as change managers usually use, right? These aren't exhaustive, right? They're not all of them, but they're the substance and core, right? And this is what I'm talking about. You get the flash early on, and then you get everybody's freaking out about training, right? 9 months later. Typically for awareness, right, you'll see all these communications go out, right? And communication by definition is one way, right? So think of those emails that go out, think of all the signage that goes up. Even if you have leaders give messaging and talk about it, unless it's a dedicated two-way conversation, right? That's just one way, okay? And once again, that's usually good enough to let people know that A, something's coming, B, they're going to be affected by it, right? It does not answer any of those questions about, well, how am I personally going to be affected? And oh, by the way, I've got like 800 questions for you, right? I'm going to jump ahead to commitment, right? Commitment, remember we said by definition is hands, right? The ability to do what it is we're asking them to do, right? And that's training. That's pretty obvious, right? And we've all sat down in training that was new fields or things. That's really easy. To the, hey, 40 hours, take a whole day, a whole week off, and oh, by the way, you gotta, fly somewhere for training. I mean, like that's pretty in depth, and we've seen that too, right? But once again, that's assuming that they get you in the seat and they're telling you how to do what it is you're being asked to do. That does not deal with what happens between the time when you announce it and it goes live and you get some of Dawn's friends that she talks about, right? The Rosie Resistor and Darth Vader and all those folks, right? So the question is, what do you do in the meantime, right? Especially when you have people that are either resistant or finicky, and correct me if I'm getting these folks wrong. The finicky fan, right, is one of them. Dan?
Yeah. So we, in our animal avatars, thanks, Dave. We talk about our stakeholders. When I teach stakeholders, I like to use our animal avatars, which are the happy dog, which is the cheerleader. So I have a dog. If you have a dog, put your dog's name in the chat. So Lita, when Lita is so happy, right, when I cook, because I drop stuff all the time, but that means she could get underfoot. So even your cheerleaders for your projects, can meddle, right? Or they can get underfoot, they can get in the way. So you need to put their energy in the right place. We've also got finicky fans. Finicky fans are our flamingos. They flock together, and they're the ones that, and I spent 20 years in Philadelphia. We got a lot of finicky fans there. They're the ones that kind of sit back and relax and say, I'm going to watch this season. I'm going to see how this project's going before I decide if I'm on board. or if I'm going to move into the next camp, which is the saboteurs, which is of course the snake. And some of the saboteurs will do this on purpose. They will actually try to sabotage your project. And other ones, they're just, grumpy. And so, they're going to be your rosy resistors and so forth. So yeah, so you have to have a plan for all your stakeholders for sure. And so Dave, how about some quick tips about that? And then let's wrap up and we'll take any questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we did have a poll question. The question is, what's the most important? Now we're going to skip that. I'm going to tell you that in my experience, the most important single thing you can do for change management is the engagement piece. Okay. And here's why, right? Once again, first off, just by definition, you have like from the time you start this thing and the time you end it, you usually have at least 6 months, right? So what do you do in the meantime when people know that there's something coming and you have all those folks that Dawn just mentioned, right? They need to have an outlet, right? And part of it is certainly just the fact that people want to understand how they're impacted, right? And so they're going to have questions, and there's some truth to this too, right? Because, many of these organizations have very special or unique requirements that they do, right? You could say accounting's accounting and such, right? But accounting is accounting. Everywhere I've ever been, accounting is accounting, but there are a couple of things that are unique to each one, right? And you want to make sure that those folks know that the people that are actually developing the process or the system or whatever it is are actually going to contain those things, right? If you have a legal group, right, there may be some things that, they can't be a digital organization only, right? They actually do need to have paper copies of some things with ink signatures, for instance, right? So you got to make sure that, there's a way to meet that need, right? So that's the process of engagement. Engagement by definition is two-way comms where people can ask questions, right, of the team. The team can respond and then both ways as well, right? Ideally, the team is identifying some key people in each of those groups and saying, hey, here's the direction we're going, right? So that's the one that's around just everything's swimming, everyone's an awesome person, right? The other thing is when you give yourself time, right? The best defense is a good offense, right? So when you have some of these folks that are resistors and maybe a little less than altruistic, right? Or maybe a little nefarious or subversive, right? By going through the engagement process, you give yourself time, you give yourself a runway to ensure that there's a sounding board, right? So when the time comes that training happens and you get that person that just like all of a sudden rears their ugly head and you can say, hey, where have you been? Right? We've been doing we've been having discussions with part of your team, as a matter of fact, right? Or whatever it happens to be. And I've actually used that. I hate to say it, but every once in a while you run into some of these folks, right? And there's one where by going forward proactively, right, and reaching out to folks, it takes away some of the, like I said, some of the less fun aspects of corporate life, of like political culture, right? And it gives you the excuse to say like, hey, where have you been? It would have been nice to be hearing this stuff before, and oh, by the way, you had an opportunity, right? So that's one of the actual practical aspects of it too, right? So when you get to that point, you can have other discussions with, maybe perhaps some leaders or some tangential other folks and say, hey, we got some resistance here that is not necessarily linked to the actual solution itself.
Right. And let's show them the bottom line on the screen so people can see it. I think you have it on there it is. So the single most important component of change management is engagement. So I just want to make sure everybody saw that. And that's the method to address the user's concerns. And so what I like to think about is, there was a great lady I used to work with named Deb. She's no longer with us. And she was a wonderful change manager. And in fact, she was assigned as the change manager for an global SAP upgrade project. And she did that engagement that you're talking about, Dave. And she had such a lovely style about her. And she was a really good listener. And she made sure that people felt heard. And she was one of those very approachable people that, you just wanted to have a a beverage with, right? You wanted to have a coffee with, you wanted to have a glass of wine with. And she was just that kind of person. And I think that one of the things that, your client, the clients that work with you, Dave, on a regular basis, like, is you're just a nice guy, right? Like, we want to, we want to talk to you. We want to chat with you. You're smart, you're fun, you're approachable. And so if any of you, are looking for who is the right person, for me to help me with my change management, if it's not you as the project manager, make sure that you have someone that is the right style, that has the right style for that environment, that will be able to, do the mob movie rule that I like to talk about, which is the keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So figuring out who are those finicky fans and saboteurs, who are going to be those resistors, making sure you bring them in and there's a forum for them that's visible, that's and that we're, getting their inputs and they can see that we're responding to those inputs in some way, will help to diffuse a lot of the resistance that happens later on when people get scared. And so most of the time, it's just fear that's happening when you run into those situations. So figuring out ways to diffuse that is really by, just like Dave is suggesting here, engaging with everyone to understand what are those concerns and fears that they have, and creating a plan, showing them you have a plan, you've listened to them, and that you're responding to it. Dave,
I'll tell you more than once, man. I've seen where a stakeholder gave something to the team that the team had totally missed. That, it may not have been catastrophic, but it's always easier to include it or fix it when you got plenty of runway, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So don't wait till the end. Make sure that your plan for change and for the human beings and the organization is there in the beginning. Make sure it's part of your plan to declare victory at the end, defining what that looks like, defining if you're just trying to get to commitment, and then working into creating an adoption plan as part of your deliverable for your project. So hopefully you've gotten some tips today and maybe even learned a few things that you can use right away on the job. What we'd love to do for you is answer any additional questions that you might have. Send us your chats in LinkedIn, link up with Dave and I, and any of our other project gurus. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to let you know this is just part of what you saw today, is a tiny, tiny little piece of what we've done for clients, in couple hour sessions, full day sessions, multi-workshop sessions, depending on their needs. So if you need help with change management in your organization, we hope you will think about us and reaching out to us, and we can just have a chat about what your needs are and what might be most helpful for you.